I'm Ayman Mohyeldin at MSNBC World Headquarters. Thank you very much for staying with me this hour. A lot to break down. Back on track. It looks more and more likely that Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un will get that face-to-face meeting they both wanted so bad. But who has the upper hand now? Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani both desperately trying to sell the story of a spy in the Trump campaign this weekend. If you repeat an evidence-free claim enough, can you actually bend reality? Well, America is about to find out. Plus, a tough week for three key figures in the Russia investigation, including the president's son. But which one is in the most legal jeopardy based on what's happened in the last 7 days alone? We're going to look ahead at that as well. But let's begin with the very latest on that potential U.S.-North Korea summit. President Trump confirming in a tweet just moments ago that a U.S. delegation is now inside North Korea, adding, quote, "I truly believe that North Korea has brilliant potential and will be a great economic and financial nation one day. Kim Jong-un agrees with me on this. It will happen." The movement, another signal that the June 12th summit may be back on as originally scheduled.
People are working on it. It's moving along very nicely. So we're looking at June 12th in Singapore. That hasn't changed. And it's moving along pretty well. So we'll see what happens.
All right, what happens could have a lot to do with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Moon agreed to a last-minute meeting with Kim Jong-un that happened on Saturday. In fact, in a televised address, Moon said the North has renewed its intention for a complete denuclearization. Here to talk about all this back and forth, Christopher Hill, former ambassador to South Korea during President George W. Bush's administration, Nayyera, former State Department senior advisor, and Jean Lee, former Pyongyang Bureau Chief for the Associated Press. Great to have all of you with us. Ambassador Hill, if I may begin with you. What's the job of the U.S. officials who are now inside North Korea and those who are also headed to Singapore? Explain to us the difference between those two teams right now.
Well, first of all, both teams are involved in preparing for the summit, but the team going to Singapore is preparing for the logistics of the summit, and the team going to Pyongyang, led by Ambassador Sung Kim, is there to talk to the North Koreans and see what is substantively is going to come out of this summit. If they've said these things to the South Koreans, they should say them to the U.S. delegation, and perhaps even they could get something in writing and have a clear understanding before the summit begins whether the summit will be successful. I worked with Sung Kim for several years. He was my deputy in the six-party talks. Fabulous diplomat. I mean, he's professional, smart, very loyal, and I just am very pleased to see professionals leading the way. So, as our president would say, let's see.
Let me ask you this question, Ambassador Hill. In a situation like this, would he be going into North Korea and saying, look, we're going to talk about denuclearization, or is he going in there, for example, and saying, we will not go unless we are talking about denuclearization?
Well, again, these are real professionals. So. Yeah. Probably it'll be something along the lines, we want a successful summit, we know you want a successful summit, but here's what we need to see as an outcome to have a successful summit. And then we'll see what the North Koreans say. But I know there are a lot of skeptics. A lot of skeptics were on the Sunday morning talk shows talking about it. I'm a little skeptical, but the idea that they could have a talk about denuclearization, make the North Koreans come up with a time frame. You know, it's not enough to say someday when the lions lie down with the lambs we'll have denuclearization. They need to give us some framework, some time frame for this to happen. And so you need professionals. And by the way, Sung Kim's been there many other times, so he knows these people very well. His interlocutor, Chae Sun-wee, she was part of the North Korean delegation that we sat across from for so many years. So they know each other, and let's see what they come up with. I think it's a very good sign.
Yeah, and Ambassador Hill, you brought up a really good point, which is the issue of denuclearization. Here's how the South Korean President Moon Jae-in characterized what came out of his Saturday meeting with Kim Jong-un. He said,
I think it would be a really good thing to establish normalized conduit for communication.
Sorry, that was actually a mistake. It was the graphic, and I'm going to read it for you guys. It says that Chairman Kim made clear once again his intentions to completely denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, as he did in the Panmunjom Declaration. So I'd like to go to you, Nayyera, and ask you, what do you think he means by complete denuclearization in this case? What does Kim Jong-un understand denuclearization to be?
Well, for Kim Jong-un, losing complete control over nuclear power or nuclear weapons is problematic because he does not actually have much of a functioning economy that would be enticing to others to build up. He largely is in power because he's been able to maintain that by the threat of military control. So denuclearization for him may mean something very different than it does for the United States, and that's part of what is important in these pre-negotiations, or the actual hard work that comes before a summit, is to agree upon definitions. Are we all identifying words the same way? Particularly, this is not just language barrier. This also has to do with intentionality. So does it mean that he will not build any new weapons? Does it mean that he will allow inspectors to come in and take apart the weapons they do have or the reactors they do have? It's all a matter of degrees, and that's the hard work that has to go into these kinds of dialogues.
And Gene, I know that you spent a lot of time there. You obviously understand the language in a way that maybe we're not going to, in the sense that there may be, as Nayyera was saying, lost in translation about the intentions and the words themselves. What does it actually mean when we think of what North Koreans understand denuclearization to be?
Kim Jong-un has been very clear. He has been rebranding himself as a statesman who embraces the concept of a weapons-free world. And he's been very clear that when he talks about denuclearization, he's talking about denuclearization of the entire Korean peninsula. And what he means by that is that he wants the United States to withdraw the nuclear umbrella that it holds over South Korea and in the region. And so I think that one of the things the North Koreans are going to say is, we need a security guarantee, we need a peace treaty, we need you to withdraw your troops, we need you to withdraw that nuclear umbrella, and then perhaps we can talk about North Korea giving up nuclear weapons.
Let me play you guys a soundbite from the former National Intelligence Director, James Clapper, because he weighed in today on how communication between Washington and North Korea can be improved. Take a listen.
I think it would be a really good thing to establish normalized conduit for communication. That, and I've been an advocate for a long time of having interest sections established in Pyongyang and Washington at a level below an embassy, but a diplomatic presence nonetheless, just as we had in Havana, Cuba for decades to deal with a government we didn't recognize.
So, Ambassador Hill, what's missing in this? Do you think that communication channels that play out between diplomats rather than places like Twitter, in the case of the president, would be better? Do you agree with Director Clapper, former Director Clapper's assessment?
I think it would be better, but let me mention the following. The Chinese had this idea back in 2006. I took it back to Washington. Everyone hated the idea of setting up some U.S. interest group, but finally they agreed. I went back to the North Koreans and I said to Kim Kye-gwan, now the senior vice minister who's come up on the net a couple of times lately, I said, good news. We've agreed to establish informal interest group section in Pyongyang, and you will establish one in Washington. And he looked at me like that was the dumbest idea he's ever heard and said, no, we're not interested in that. So it was a Chinese idea because it worked for them. I'm not sure the North Koreans are interested. I'd also like to point out that if you call their the six-party agreement, which was in September 2005, we said in the agreement that this is denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We affirm there are no U.S. nuclear weapons in Korea. The South Koreans affirm they have no intention ever of introducing such weapons. We talked about our desire to have a peace treaty. We laid this all out, and the North Koreans walked away from it because they could not accept intrusive verification. No question there are going to be these problems going ahead, and they have not gotten nearly as close as they did in September, but they did agree to a lot of those things back in September 2005 and eventually walked away. So Sung Kim knows all that because he was there. And so I think this will be a very, very useful meeting.
Gene, let me ask you, one of the things, as we just saw from President Trump's tweet, where he's saying that North Korea could become one day an economic or financial powerhouse, or at least a vibrant economy, is that something you think that the North Korean leader actually wants to achieve? Is there risk that he thinks if he opened up his country to Western-style capitalism or economic prosperity, that that might somehow undermine his grip on power?
Absolutely. It's very difficult for the North Koreans. They are walking a fine line, the North Korean regime, I should say, between wanting to open up so they can have the economic benefits. They are so cut off and so isolated right now, and it has really hampered their economy from moving forward. But that risks losing control over the way that people think, their access to information. And so we've seen the growing pains that they've had even throughout Kim Jong-un's leadership in trying to make some changes economically, but also chafing at the loss of control over information, the flow of information, and what that means to expose the people to outside concepts and the outside world.
And Nayyera, let me get your thoughts really quickly. What warnings would you give President Trump and his team when it comes to negotiating with the North Koreans going into this over the next couple of weeks?
Well, unfortunately, the warning of don't negotiate in public, negotiate behind closed doors is not where we're at right now. But this next step of having these officials meet at a substantive level is the right thing to do, and to not oversell and overpromise what will come out of this summit. I think the early talk of Donald Trump believing that just getting the two people and leaders in a room was all that was needed. He'd get a Nobel Peace Prize. All that did was position the United States as overeager for this meeting, giving the upper hand to North Korea. So it seems a lot more balanced now, with an opportunity of moving forward with some real substantive change. Yeah, the hard work begins now, so to speak. All right, Ambassador Christopher Hill, Jean Lee, great to have both of you with us. Thank you very much. Nayyera, stick around for us. You'll be back in just a minute.